Hello, welcome to Study Circle. Today we are going to read Class 11th Standard Political Science, Chapter 1 Constitution Why and How. If you are preparing for any teaching exam or any competitive exam, then this video is going to be very useful for you. So, if you are new in this channel, then please do subscribe and like and share this video. This video is the summary of this whole chapter. So, without wasting any more time, let's start. Constitution Why and How. It is necessary to understand that the entire structure of the government and the various principles that bind the institution of government have their origin in the Constitution of India. So what are the need of Constitution? Constitution allows coordination and assurance. Constitution provides a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of a society. For minimal degree of coordination, any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and known to all members. So enforcement of rules. Their enforcement gives an assurance to everybody that others will follow these and there will be punishment for not following them. A specification of decision making powers. It specifies who has the power to make decisions in a society and decides how the government will be constituted. It is body of fundamental principles according to which a state is constituted or governed. It specifies the basic allocation of power in a society. It decides who will make the laws. In the Indian Constitution, Parliament gets to decide laws and policies. So, what are the limitations on powers of government? The need is that if law made by the government based on certain procedures are found to be unjust and unfair, it sets some limits on what the government can impose on citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. It specifies certain fundamental rights that all of us possesses as citizens and which no government can ever be allowed to violate, such as protection from being arrested arbitrarily. Citizens will normally have the right to some basic liberties, to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom to conduct a trade or business, etc. It specifies circumstances when these rights may be withdrawn. These rights can be limited during times of national emergency. Aspirations and goals of a society. It enables the government to fulfill the aspiration of a society and create condition for a just society. Most of older constitutions limited themselves largely to allocating decision-making power and setting some limits to government power. Societies with deep entrenched inequalities of various kinds will not only have to set limits on the power of government, but they will also have to enable and empower the government to take positive measures to overcome forms of inequality or deprivation. For example, India aspires to be a society that is free of caste discrimination, and for this, the government will have to be empowered to take all the necessary steps to achieve this goal. The constitutions makers thought that each individual in society should have all the necessary for them to lead a life of minimal dignity and social self respect, minimum material well being, education. So, the Indian constitution enables the government to take positive welfare measures, some of which are legally enforceable. So, what are the fundamental identity of people? The people as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitutions. It is by agreeing to a basic set of norms about how one should be governed and who should be governed that one forms a collective identity. So, what is national identity? National identity is different nations embody different conceptions about the relationship between the different regions of a nation and the central government. This relationship constitutes the national identity of a country. So, what are the main functions of the constitutions? The first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination among the members of a society. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. The third function of a constitution is to set some limits on what the government can impose on its citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. The fourth function of a constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspiration of a society and create conditions for a just society. The authority of a constitution. In most countries, constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles about the state, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms it should follow. In some countries, such as United Kingdom, do not have one single document that can be called the constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that, taken collectively, are referred to as the constitutions. Factors responsible for effectiveness of constitution. The mode of promulgation. It talks about how a constitution come into being, who crafted the constitution, and what is the limit of their authority. In many countries, constitutions remain defunct because they are crafted by military leaders or leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. Some successful constitutions, like India and South Africa, were created in the aftermath of popular national movements, and in some countries have subjected their constitution to a full-fledged referendum where all the people will vote on desirability of a constitution. So, formations of Indian constitution. It was formally created by Constituent Assembly between December 1946 and November 1949 and drew upon a long history of the nationalist movement that had a remarkable ability to take along different sections of Indian society together. The date is that between December 1946 and November 1949, the Constituent Assembly was formally created. The final document reflected a broad national consensus at the time. So, enormous public authority. It had the consensus that backing of leaders who were themselves popular, and it was never subjected to a referendum. The people adopted it as their own by aiding by its provisions. Therefore, the authority of people who enact the constitution helps determine in part its prospects for success. Substantive provisions of a constitution. Hallmark of a successful constitution is that it gives everyone in society some reasons to go along with its provisions. Next is, no constitution by itself achieves perfect justice, but it has to convince people that it provides the framework for pursuing basic justice. For example, a group will have no reason to abide by it; their identity is being stifled. More a constitution preserves the freedom and equality of all its members, the more likely it is to succeed. Balanced institutional design. No single group can subvert constitution. Well-crafted constitution fragment power in society intelligently. Checks and balances. It ensures that no single institution acquires monopoly of power. This is often done by fragmenting power across different institutions. For example, the Indian constitution horizontally fragments power across different institutions like the legislature, executive, and the judiciary for ensuring that other institutions can check transgression of other. It must strike the right balance between certain values, norms, and procedures as authoritative and allow enough flexibility in its operations to adapt to changing needs and circumstances. So, issues is that too rigid constitution. It is likely to break under the weight of a change, and too flexible is that a constitution will give no security, predictability, or identity to a people. Indian constitution is described as a living document. Why? By striking a balance between the possibility to change the provisions and the limits on such changes, the constitution has ensured that it will survive as a document respected by people. So, formation of Indian constitution. It was made by the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected for undivided India. It held its first sitting on 9 December 1946 and reassembled as Constituent Assembly for divided India on 14 August 1947. Members of Assembly. They were not elected by universal suffrage and were chosen by indirect election by the members of provincial legislative assemblies that had been established under the Government of India Act 1935. The Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of British Cabinet known as Cabinet Mission. Each province and each princely state or group of states were allotted seats proportional to their respective population, roughly the ratio of 1 lakh as 1 lakh. As a result, the provinces that were under direct British rule were elected 292 members, while the princely state were allotted to minimum of only 93 seats. The seats in each province were distributed among three main communities, that is Muslim, Sikhs, and General, and in proportion to their respective population. Members of each community in the provincial legislative assembly elected their own representative by a method of proportional representation with single transferable vote. The method of selection in the case of representatives of princely states was to be determined by consultation. So, what are the compositions of Constituent Assembly? It was the consequence of the partition under the plan of 3 June 1947. Members elected from territories which fell under Pakistan ceased to be members of the Constituent Assembly, and the members of the Assembly was reduced to 299. The Constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, and 284 members were actually present on 24 January 1950 and appended their signature to the Constitution as finally passed. The Constitution came into force on 26 January 1950. The Constitution was committed to a new conception of citizens where minorities would be secure and religious identity would have no bearing on citizenship rights. The representative of Constituent Assembly is the members of all religions were given representation under the scheme. In addition, the Assembly had 28 members from the scheduled caste. In terms of political parties, the Congress dominated the Assembly, occupying as many as 82% of their seats in the Assembly after the partition, but it itself was a diverse party that managed to accommodate almost all shades of opinion within it. The principle of deliberation is that the authority of the Constituent Assembly it comes from the procedures it adopted to frame the Constitution and the values its members brought to the deliberations. Interest of whole nation is that it was desirable that diverse section of society participate not only as representatives of their own identity or community. Each member deliberated upon Constitution with the interest of their whole nation in mind. The healthy debate, testament to a democratic commitment, is that almost every issue that lies at the foundation of a modern state was discussed with great sophistication. Only one provision of the introduction of universal suffrage of the Constitution was passed without virtually any debate. Members were engaged in public reason. Emphasis on discussion and reason argument, they did not simply advance their own interest but gave principal reason to other members for their positions. The voluminous debates in the Constituent Assembly debating and scrutinizing each clause of the Constitution is a tribute to public reason at its best. These debates deserve to be memorialized as one of the most significant chapters in the history of Constitution. Procedures. Mundane procedures of the Assembly. The Constituent Assembly has 8 major commitments on different subjects. Usually, Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel, or B.R. Ambedkar chaired these committees. Working together despite differences, Ambedkar was bitter critic of the Congress and Gandhi and accusing them of not doing enough for the upliftment of scheduled caste. Patel and Nehru disagreed on many issues. Each committee usually drafted particular provisions of the Constitution which were then subjected to debate by the entire Assembly. So, what attempts to reach a consensus? The belief is that provisions agreed to by all would not be detrimental to any particular interest. Some provisions are subject to the vote, and every single argument, query, or concern was responded with great care and writing. The Assembly met for 166 days, spread over 2 years and 11 months. The time period is very important. You have to remember it that the Assembly met for 166 days and over 2 years and 11 months. Its sessions were open and to the press and the public alike. Its sessions were open to the press and public alike. Inheritance of the nationalist movement. Consensus on main principles for constitution. The Constituent Assembly was giving concrete shape and form to the principles it had inherited from the nationalist movement. The nationalist movement had debated many questions that were relevant to the making of constitution like the shape and form of government. Answers forged in those debates were given their final form in the constitution. The best summary of this principle is that objective resolution, the resolution that defined the aims of the assembly, it was moved by Nehru in 1946 and had the aspirations and values behind the constitution. It inspired the substantive provisions of the constitution. Based on this resolution, the constitution gave institutional expression to these fundamental commitments, that is equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, etc. Our constitution is a moral commitment to establish a government that will fulfill their promises that the nationalist movement held before the people. So, what are the main points of the objectives of resolution? India is an independent and sovereign republic, and India shall be union of erstwhile British Indian territories, Indian states, and other parts outside British India and Indian states as are willing to be part of the union. Territories forming the union shall be autonomous units and exercise all powers and functions of the government and administration except those assigned to or vested in the union. All powers and authority of sovereign and independent India and its constitution shall flow from the people. All people of India shall be guaranteed and secured social, economic, and political justice, equality of status and opportunities, and equality before law. The fundamental freedoms of speech, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action subject to law and public morality. The minorities, backward and tribal areas, depressed, and other backward classes shall be provided adequate safeguards. The territorial integrity of the Republic and its sovereign rights on land, sea, and air shall be maintained according to justice and law of civilized nation. The land would make full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and welfare of mankind. The institutional arrangements. The basic principles of institutional arrangement is that government must be democratic and committed to the welfare of the people. Constitution's effectiveness depends upon a balanced arrangement of the institutions of government. The Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on evolving the right balance among the various institutions. Learned from experiments and experiences of other countries. The constitution makers borrowed number of provisions from the different countries, not imitation. Each provision of the constitution had to be defended on grounds that it was suited to Indian problems and aspirations. So, provisions adapted from constitutions from different countries, that British constitutions, Irish constitution, French constitution, Canadian constitution, United constitution. So, from British constitution, we uh, adapted the first past the post parliamentary form of government, the idea of rule of law, and the institution of the speaker and her or his role and law making procedures. From United States constitution, we adapted Charter of Fundamental Rights, power of judicial review and independence of the judiciary, and from Irish constitution we adapt the directive principles of the state policy. French constitution we adapt the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And from Canadian constitution we adapt a quasi-federal form of government, a federal system with strong central government, and the idea of residual of powers. So, now the interesting points of this chapter is that enabling provisions of the constitutions. The constitution give powers to the government for pursuing collective goods of the society. Constitution of South Africa. It assigns many responsibilities to the government. It wants the government to take measures to promote conservation of nature, make efforts to protect person or group subjected to unfair discrimination, etc. Case of Indonesia. In Indonesia, the government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of social democracy. This is a statement by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, what? Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of its social democracy. A statement by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. What is universal suffrage? Yes, universal suffrage means that all citizens reaching a certain age would be entitled to be voters irrespective of religion, caste, education, gender, or income. The debate over constitution making in Nepal. Since 1948, Nepal had multiple constitutions. The 1990 constitution introduced a multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final powers in many respects. The king was not ready to give up powers and took over all powers in October 2002. Finally, under pressure of popular agitation, the king had to install a government acceptable to the agitating parties. In 2008, Nepal emerged as a democratic republic after abolishing the monarchy. Finally, Nepal adopted a new constitution in 2015. So, this is the summary of this whole chapter, and this video is intended for revision purpose only. So, if you are doing revision for this chapter, then this video is very useful for you. So, if you like this video, then do like, share, and subscribe. We need your support. Thank you.